It's Monday and time for the Back to Business podcast, featuring Calgary's industry leaders. Welcome today's show host, Kim Hayden.
We all have one thing in common, and that is our finances. Everybody, everywhere has to figure it out. The reality is, it's something we all have to learn. Our guest today in studio is Susyn Wagner and her partner, Karen Rutledge, and they're here to not only kind of peel back some of the mysteries or myths around finances, but also how you can start moving forward into that space of investing and hopefully even get to your legacy stage. So, you know what? Ramsey's got nothing on this episode. Stick around. Guaranteed you're going to need a pen and paper because we've got something for you. We here at the Calgary Petroleum Club, in a spirit of reconciliation, honor and acknowledge that the land on which we learn, work, and live is Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. This place is a traditional homeland for the First Nations and Métis peoples, and today we all are part of this treaty land. Awesome. Welcome to the show. So it's Susyn with a Y.
It's with a Y.
And Karen.
Karen, yeah.
Awesome. I just want to dive in because with the three of us, I know this conversation is going to get really dynamic. And as I've said, you guys are fully free to say, okay, Kim, moving on, or let's go into that a little bit deeper, Kim. I am here for the journey and I'm excited to listen and learn because this is actually one space around finances and understanding our money and how our money does work for us, one way or the other. This has always been a challenge for myself. And so I'm excited to be here today. So, but before we get started, if you could each introduce yourself, that would be great.
My name is Susyn Wagner, and I'm with the Wagner Investment Management team at Wellington Altus Private Wealth. I've been in the industry pretty much my entire working career. I would say and have said oftentimes that finances are really in my DNA because my mom was one of the first women advisors in Calgary, probably in Canada, and worked in the 1970s with Merrill Lynch. And so I always used to say, my mom doesn't make chocolate chip cookies. She does blue chip stocks. So, because that was her focus. And so I was always interested in it. And when I had an opportunity later in life to enter into the industry, I took it. And so I've been working with clients, private clients, retail clients since about the mid 90s. And we work primarily with clients what I call is their serious money. So these are monies that they are either saving for or have already accumulated that they're using for retirement. Our practice has or had three women certified financial planners. We just had one of the gals that was working with us retire, Patty Dolan. So both of us are certified financial planners, but we're also portfolio managers. And what that means is that we work discretionarily on behalf of our clients to invest their monies based on the financial plan and the goals and objectives within the financial plan we created. So we handle the day-to-day decisions on the investments themselves based on their goals. And that's a little different than some advisory practices, whereas we work based on the mandate the client gives us. And then we report back to them with their performance and cash flow and expenses that we've outlined for them at least 2 to 3 times a year, but it's very much a big picture perspective for that client. But then we get down and look at the details and say, how do we make this happen?
Yeah. And I work alongside with Susyn. I'm Karen Rutledge, and my role is as a senior financial planner and senior investment advisor with the team. Like with Susyn, I've been in the industry for pretty much my entire working career. So I actually started with a psychology degree and then transitioned to working for a financial institution in the summer and really found that finance was something I was quite interested in. And as I evolved through my life, I realized that my interest in finance really came from the life experiences that I had growing up. So I grew up in a family where money wasn't really a topic of conversation, and things happened. My parents went through a bankruptcy when I was in junior high, and I didn't realize how much that impacted me and stuck with me. And so I realized as I started looking after my own money, how important it was to have a plan in place, how important it was to really be aware of where I was and where I was going. So that's been something I've been really passionate about, and it's something that I'm able to translate into the work that we do with clients every day.
Makes me think a bit of the hare and the tortoise when you talked about your parents, right?
Yeah.
And we were talking before we started about the quick start and the different analogies and such. And I mean, we've had 40 minutes of conversation before we even turned on the mics, because this really is a subject that we live in a world where money is what we trade and barter. And if you don't have money, you are at a disadvantage when it comes to, and I'm not saying, we got to be clear here, it's A-okay, Mother Teresa, she was out there, she did not make money, but she was cared for, right? She had her food, she had, so if money is, if you're saying, well, I don't need money to have my purpose, I understand that, but at the end of the day, somebody's got to feed you, right?
Absolutely.
So when we look at this, you had mentioned that a lot of your clients are older, so they're in the second half of their life, right? So is there? I want to ask a question, and folks, we're not going to get a definitive answer because there's so many answers to this, but I'd love to have you guys weigh in on this. Are people under the age of 50 less likely to engage with this planning and this building and this and such because they don't understand it, or that it's not important at that time in their life? Why is a lot of this people over 50 kind of generation going to engage?
So I have found that people generally within 5 to 10 years of retirement actually are referred to us oftentimes, and that's when they're starting to get serious about when they're going to retire, or they're starting to think, oh, when might I retire? Do I have enough money to retire? If I retire, how much will I spend? And if I've accumulated enough money, how will I make sure it lasts for my entire lifetime? That's a very common question. So I think, well, just looking back to when I was in my early 40s, that I was quite concerned about paying my bills, making sure my kids were picked up on time, making sure I was, putting enough towards the mortgage. I would usually put more towards the mortgage than I might towards the savings. So I think I was doing more detail work. I had a number of different pots that I had to put money into, but I was more scattered. But when you start to look out and you're getting close to 50, and you can say to yourself, well, geez, when might I want to retire? Will it be 60, 65? There's always the magical freedom 55. So we do have some people in the early 40s that come to see us saying, oh, can I retire at 55? So I really think it has to do with what stage you are in life. And oftentimes people have had their children in their early to mid-20s. It's the first time that they're starting to think, oh, my kids are going to be out of the house. I'm going to have more money that I might be able to dedicate towards savings. How about you, Karen? You do most of our financial planning. Yeah. We both work together, but you're our senior planner. What are your thoughts?
And I think it's a combination of things. So like what Susyn was mentioning, sometimes there's those defining moments in your life where you look and you realize, hey, I need to get serious about my wealth, and I really need to start having a plan and making some decisions. But when you also think about just how the world has evolved over the last 20, 30 years, there's a lot of resources and information that's available out there. So a lot of individuals could maybe try to figure out how to do things a little bit on their own. But is that really the best way? Is it the most effective and the most efficient way? And how do you get connected with somebody to really help you take a look at your finances and look at your overall financial situation if you're at that stage where maybe what you're doing on your own isn't quite working anymore. So I think that it's important to have that relationship with somebody who has that background, that knowledge, that expertise to really help you make your money work as efficiently as it possibly can. Yeah. It's almost like working with a trainer on the physical side of things, right? You're going to be much more effective if you have somebody keeping you aware, keeping you focused, reminding you of the things that you need to do. And that's really a big part of how we help people.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You just said something that I think is interesting around there's a lot of resources out there. Mm-hmm. And in this day and age of social media and such, and I'm not bashing on Ramsey, not going to bash on him. However, I personally feel that at times he could do more damage than good. I think that at the core, most of his information is fundamentally sound, right? Don't go out and eat. If you can't afford to pay, don't go out and eat. Yeah. However, the way he says it and the way he comes across can be very, very, I think, and this is to you, Karen, with the psychology background.
Yeah.
People are going out to eat to soothe because it's the only thing that they can control in a financially challenging environment. So when we have those types of influences like the Ramseys, and then everybody is a financial expert, buy this Bitcoin and be a millionaire. What are some of the things that you guys can tell people or share through the show here that if you're under 40 and you're listening to all this and you're confused, what are some of maybe the red flags we should pay attention to that maybe this is not the right space or place to get all of my information? I should look for information elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Does this make sense? Because
absolutely.
Don't get me wrong. And please, folks, do not write in. Yes, Ramsey's got good information. He's written books. However, I just think sometimes he's a little not nice.
Well, and I am a fan of a lot of the fundamental concepts. But there's a couple of things to keep in mind. So one is, of course, everybody's situation is unique. And it's really important to look at your individual situation to make decisions that make the most sense for you. But when we go to individuals who are even younger, there are some fundamental truths. Fundamental truth number one is don't spend more than you make. Well, how do you figure that out? You have to track your spending. To me, that's something I speak to clients about all the time, whether they're younger or older. You need to know where your money is going. And then another fundamental truth is you need to start saving at a young age. The future comes faster than you think. Like when we think about how long we've been in the industry, and sometimes it's like the blink of an eye. And so you need to be prepared to start thinking about the long term now because it's going to be here before you know it.
So yes, I think that's very, very good, wise advice. But I think that you have to plan based on reality. So in some cases, you actually do have to spend a little more than you make. You have a lot of different things that show up. Maybe your heater in your house went, or maybe your car all of a sudden requires a major repair. So there are times you're going to have to spend more than what you make. And I think what happens with people oftentimes is if they're not being perfect, the way Ramsey says, then they just say, okay, then I'm just not going to pay attention at all. So you talking about at minimum, try to track your expenses. There are some really good apps out there that allow you to track your expenses without you having to pay attention almost at all. You can hook your accounts in. They used to have, your bank can track at a number of different things. So if at minimum you're looking at those expenses regularly and not necessarily always applying good or bad to it, but the fact is if you're not paying attention, that's where things start to go wrong. So I always say, at least have somewhat of a plan, try to work towards that, recognizing it won't always be perfect. But I do think that's where people get in trouble because they think, oh, geez, I'm not able to balance my budget. I wasn't able to do it in 23. I wasn't able to do it in 22, and they quit counting. Rather than just saying, okay, maybe I'm making progress, a little bit of progress. So I think that's really important, is to be actually realistic as well.
Yeah.
And there's a term, progress over perfection.
Correct.
Yes.
I am going to dive in. We're going to dive into don't spend more than you make. How does an entrepreneur do that? That has a fluid income. And I want to make sure that we talk about women specifically, because we know that unfortunately a very high percentage of women over the age of 80 are in absolute poverty. And how can we avoid that moving forward? So let's talk about entrepreneurship. This is, and I've been an entrepreneur my entire life. I have not received a paycheck since 1997. And as an entrepreneur, I was in real estate, and in 2007, the entire floor got pulled out, and we were over leveraged just to top it all off. How does an entrepreneur don't spend more than they make?
Well, so when I think about that, I think sometimes you do have to spend more than what you make. The fact is you may need to overextend for business purposes. There are advantages to do that. At least if you have a loan for your business, you're able to write off some of the interest, that type of thing. So how you look at your business should be different than how you're looking at your personal situation. But yes, I also have not had a paycheck since, I can't even remember when, sometime in the 90s. So there are times where I have had to hire someone. I've had to perhaps add some marketing. It would be later that I would find out whether that was a good investment. Yeah. So I think we have to look at that. That's an investment in your career, and then you break it out as to your personal spending. So I think there's a lot of difference between the two.
And how I also look at it is everybody should know what is your kind of basic minimum functioning amount. So what are the minimum obligations that I have to put out on a monthly basis no matter what? And understanding what that number is a good place to start off from, because there will be months where you may bring in significantly more than that, and you can plan for some of those leaner months. But really, again, it's about understanding where you're at. And it's not just about spending necessarily, but also understanding, where you're at from a net worth perspective, how much debt you have, how much investments you have set to the side. It gives you that opportunity to track that progress that we were talking about before, really knowing where you are and then figuring out where you can go from there.
So a lot of times we'll start with a basic plan with a client that's in their 40s, and it is not with the intention of trying to keep them on track. It's called an asset, income, and expense projection. It's not a financial plan into the future. At least you should know, where am I today, so that next year or the year after, we can then look at where are you at 2 years later and at least make some observations. For me, knowledge is power. So if we see, 3 years in a row, my total picture is not growing, well, what's happening there? Let's make some observations. And it's much easier for you as the person that's having the financial plan done to say, well, I know that there's perhaps some things I could be doing a little bit differently. And that's where the power in the financial plan is start with something that is just basic, and it will grow over time. Like it's always a work in progress.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's so much, and I love the word fluidity. There's so much fluidity in today's society. We're seeing different industries being completely knocked out through AI technologies. We haven't even seen the full scale of robotics and what robotics are going to do over the next decade. And yet there's all these, I got sucked down a rabbit hole watching this young family convert a 40-foot school bus into their home, and he's a photographer. I'm fascinated by this new generation that's coming online, and what absolutely amazes me is in my lifetime, I will see an entire transition from the industrial age to that creator's age, right? And in the industrial age, and this is something I want to talk about, and then I want to talk about the event you have coming up, which, by the way, I want 2 tickets to. The industrial age, I think, may have contributed to what we see with women over 70 and 80 being in our highest demographic of seniors in poverty, right? It's, I know that my grandmother, who passed away at 94 just a few years back. Of course, when you hit 55, a few years is actually, Mom, that happened a decade ago. Yeah. But when my grandmother passed away, had she not had locked in a great spot at the Mennonite housing in Kansas, had she not had a little bit of savings saved up, right, she would not have been able to survive at the level she did, right? So let's talk about people who are right now over 50 and then the opportunities for women coming up.
Sure. Some of the things that we do different, what I think is very important, is we stress test our financial plans. And so what that means is we are testing our plans based on inflation, varying life expectancy, longevity, as well as rates of return. So in theory, you should be, a rule of thumb, we've always said if you have a 75% or better chance of success where you do not have to use your lifestyle assets, then it's a reasonable assumption you could go ahead with retirement. But you don't just do this once. We test it all the time. So we've had clients that have had 100% chance of success, and then some things have changed, and perhaps their spending was more than they expected, and we can see if it starts to deteriorate. I always say that we like to see the successful plan, at least, again, the 75% or better, when you're at retirement. Oftentimes it will strengthen because maybe the market goes up, as an example, or unfortunately with COVID, there were a couple of years where people weren't spending, and we saw all of our numbers actually increase. This last year or two, with expenses, with traveling being higher, we're starting to see it come down. And so that's a really important thing that we do, and it will let us know if we're off track. And that is what I think would have helped people when you talk about how did they all of a sudden end up in their 70s and 80s. As my mother would have said, you're going to end up eating cat food.
Shh, that's not funny. I've actually said that.
A certain generation. But that was what my mother used to say all the time, especially when she retired in 2011, but she was definitely a straight shooter. If you don't straighten up. But the fact is you don't usually just end up in that situation. It's usually a number of years, actually oftentimes 10 years worth of misspending. So that's one of the things. We update them regularly. If you're retired, we do an update every year. For people who are closer to retirement, we might do it every other year. Just depends. We've had some real keeners that are in their 40s. They like it every year, which is great. So I think that is where things might have been different. And I think some of the decisions possibly that were made, and I don't know the people, there's in general.
In general, that 70 and over had a lower percentage of women who worked.
Correct.
And so that's why we see that. But now we're coming in where it's like it's in fact, women are now gaining control of the bulk of the wealth globally.
Well, that's true. And if you look at where things are at in Canada currently, 77% of widows are women. And that's not just to talk about, a situation where somebody loses their spouse, but we are starting to see not only more women having to be in charge of their own wealth, but in charge of their wealth for a longer period of time. And historically, women do not pursue advice from a financial advisor. Actually, men are more likely to go to a financial advisor than women are. And so it just reinforces the importance of why you need to engage with somebody so that we can look at these scenarios and really give somebody a plan that works well, not only today, but as things change going forward. Again, I think it's 80% of women are centenarians, I think is how you say it, when they're over 100. So women live longer, right? They're in charge of their wealth longer, and we need to make sure that we're accounting for that.
Yeah. And each plan is unique, because we've had a client that I remember it was quite interesting how this worked out, but she actually quit working at 45 specifically for 5 years, I think it was, maybe a little longer. And we worked the plan out, and we'd always done planning with this client. And we had to say when she was going to come back to work, and she got back into the workforce in her 50s. But we had all of that modeled out, and she's actually retired now. Yeah. And she was able to. And so, I often say I probably have hundreds of clients who we've retired together with. We go into retirement with, because I've been doing hands-on planning since the early 2000s. So I've been able to see people start at the planning phase and go into the retirement phase. But I think that one of the things that may not be mentioned as much, but families in general are spending a lot more money on their adult children. And I think that is going to have an effect on some of the retirement objectives, because we've had the last few years where the markets have actually been reasonably good, so you've been having your wealth growing, but it can't actually continue like that. At some point in time, it might start to decline because your expense needs are so high. So I think that is something that we have to look out for. And women are very, not to say men are not, but women can be very kind-hearted, especially to their children. I know I've been guilty of this myself, where maybe my heart is actually louder than the common sense part of me. So we have people subsidizing mortgages. We have people paying for expenses now. That is different from previous generations. I don't know if you remember when you were launched. For me, there was not a lot of fanfare. I wasn't coming back to the trough anymore. That's done.
Yeah, the room was redecorated. I was out, right?
That's right.
Let's talk real quickly before we close the show. I want to talk about, you have an event coming up in April, and it's our Savvy Invest with Purpose workshop that is geared towards women. Yep. Now, what I want to do is, a lot of people don't attend something because of fear or embarrassment, because they feel like maybe they're behind the curve. First of all, can you share us where somebody should be at in their curve in order to attend this workshop?
I think as long as they're interested, that they should come.
Yeah.
And it's our Savvy Women Invest with Purpose. And our experience has been that oftentimes women will start to invest or become more interested in investment if they have a specific value or purpose attached to it. So a lot of this talks about what are your goals, what are your values, what's important to you, and then applying a financial plan, investment strategy around that objective.
So it's that whole live with purpose, right? I can do this for another 5 years. I just had a great conversation with a gal, unfortunately, at a funeral, and she's always been financially savvy. She was the one that did the books all through her previous marriage, so forth and so on. And she went and she just flat out asked, how much do I need to save weekly and how long do I have to work in order to leave $50,000 to each child? And I thought that was very, very clear and concise. It gave her a direct goal and such. And I just want to let everybody know, I am not I'm really good at generating revenue, not so good at managing revenue. And I will be at this workshop. So if you feel that this isn't a space that is the right space for you, sometimes it's okay to look at, I want to invest, but maybe I just need to understand my finances before I can invest. Because I think when we hear investment, we feel like I have to come to you with $50,000 or $100,000. But if somebody only has $200 at the end of the day each month, they can still be an investor. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's really about, the reason we talk about values is it's about the why. You have to figure out the why, and then the investing is the how. So really focusing on why you're doing this and why you're making these decisions, it's going to help you be more successful. Yeah.
I remember when I hosted this once before, my mom actually came to it, and she'd retired. And she said she wasn't sure I had asked her to show up. I needed someone to show up so she could tell me how it was going. And so she said I was, going along. She goes, I thought to myself, I wonder, how could anything here really apply to me now? I'm retired. I'm already set. But it was more so she was still investing, but what was her purpose at that point in time? What was her value at that point in time? So she was no longer saving for a retirement goal. She was there. But now with the monies that she had in place, how did she want that to work for her? So I found that interesting from that perspective. So it's not just people who are retiring. It's more so in general, what are you doing with your money? How do you want to use it? And what areas do you want to affect? So.
Incredible. Conversation a lot of us don't want to have, but we should be having. And it's okay if you're in the surviving stage, because if you survive right, you'll get to the thrive. You get to the thrive, you can then invest. And then, like Susyn's mom, you can then consider your legacy.
Yeah.
So, ladies, you are rock stars. I so appreciate you coming in today.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I quite enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us today on the Back to Business podcast. Be sure to visit calpeteclub.com, CALPETECLUB.com, to find out more about upcoming events, networking opportunities, and membership. If you are not already a valued member at the CPC, where we are proudly connecting and supporting Calgary's business leaders.